13 exonerations, all connected to one forensic scientist. I'm Tessa Kramer, host of the new podcast series, Admissible, a podcast about evidence.
Those aren't my genes.
This is the worst kind of fraud.
It calls into question the cases that she worked.
Yeah, they knew this.
And she worked a lot of cases.
There's no way they didn't know it was wrong.
Listen to Admissible, Shreds of Evidence, wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to RVA's Got Issues, a podcast about politics and public affairs in and around Richmond, Virginia. I'm your host, Rich Marr. On this episode, RVA's got issues with FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. It's a law that requires government officials to share information. We'll talk with two local activists who wanted to know how free is government info in RVA. We'll hear their surprising answer. Then RVA's got questions about your county board of supervisors. Every county in Virginia has one, but what are they and what do they do? Finally, for our community spotlight, we'll talk with some urban farmers who are working to bring healthy food to everyone in RVA. All that and more coming up on RVA's Got Issues. On this episode, RVA's got issues with FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. What is it, and does it work the way it's supposed to? To help us, we're joined by Jesse Perry and Becca Duval of RVA Dirt, an online collective of watchdog activists and citizen journalists, which, according to their website, is a group of busy women making time to stick their noses into Richmond politics. Welcome, Jesse and Becca.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So first, some background, right? The Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, is a federal law. It was passed in 1966. It's been updated a few times since, and it ensures the public's access to government info. And here in Virginia, we have a version of that law that also means that you should have access to what the government is doing. You make a request to a government agency or public official, we call that a FOIA request, and they're supposed to provide the documents you're asking for. Let's say you're at the bar with a friend or your mom calls and says, "What's a FOIA?" What do you tell them? Becca, what do you tell them?
It may as well be a foreign language when you start telling people, oh, well, I just FOIA'd this information. You did what now?
Yeah.
You have to be in government or you have to be in journalism, really, to have firsthand knowledge about it. But the idea is the government works for us, the people, and so the people have access to whatever it is the government is doing.
Is that how you see it, Jesse?
Absolutely. I just really feel like at the end of the day, it's our taxpayer dollars and it's our right to know exactly where they're going to. And we should be able to get answers from our government. That's part of accountability. I think that we all have responsibility as voting citizens.
So, Becca, why do you FOIA? How did you learn how to do this?
When Fox burned down.
Fox Elementary School.
Fox Elementary School. My kids, I had two kids there, realizing sitting in a school board meeting that the board was not very focused on things like how to get my kids back into a physical building. And the timing did not sync up well for them in that it piqued my interest because it was also budget season. And so very first FOIA is correspondence between the board members about this budget. And it sort of opened up a world of possibilities of if I can get these emails, I can also get all kinds of answers. And so as I had questions, I didn't just sort of grumble about transparency. I could do something about it.
And so it really is just you send an email to the right person and just ask them for stuff and you can get it.
Mm-hmm. And it is their job. One of the barriers that we have in getting information from the government is this sense that, why are you giving me busy work? Why are you making me go on this chase for information and emails from 2 years ago? And we just need to remember that complying with FOIA is their job.
And yet at the same time, as you've said, not everybody in government seems to think or act like it is. Like, what are some of the obstacles you run into? I think on your blog on rvadirt.com, you've written about how governments might weaponize the costs of a FOIA. Can you talk about what the costs are and how that works?
Yeah, some FOIAs are expensive for legitimate reasons. If you're asking for the FOIA officer to track down 200 emails, They also have to read 200 emails and make sure that they're not giving you information that would compromise anybody else. And then you have times where, well, actually, this is an official document that already exists. I'm not asking you to generate anything. I'm not asking you to go out of your way, and that should be totally free. And so sometimes you'll notice that the fee that you receive for that work does not seem like it matches up with the request.
And the other issue is response time, right, Jesse? You've run into problems with FOIAs where it just seems like it takes forever for them to get back to you.
It's supposed to be that they respond to you within 5 business days, not counting holidays, or at least they're supposed to tell you that they have an extension or request an extension from you because it's going to take too long. And it's just very frustrating because it's like there's not a lot of recourse in those situations of how do you get someone to respond to an email? You can't find a phone number to start calling someone necessarily, but how do you get someone to respond other than you just keep sending the same email or you take it to court?
And so you folks noticed this over your work and decided to do a little experiment, right? Jesse, you want to take us through that experiment?
Yeah, so Becca had this great idea. She was FOIAing, I believe, Richmond Public Schools, and she decided to ask the same question of the other school districts in the area. And at the same time, there was a whistleblower lawsuit where the FOIA officer is basically saying there was retaliation against her. So there's obviously a breakdown.
In the city of Richmond.
In the city of Richmond, exactly. So we kind of talked about it and realized maybe we should do this not just for Richmond Public Schools, but for the local government agencies in general and see, is this just Richmond getting picked on by not responding to FOIAs, or is this like a rampant issue?
Right. And so you actually FOIA'd about FOIA, right? You requested information from each of these local governments about their FOIA requests. Is that right?
Yeah. So 2 questions we asked was, how much money did you make off of FOIA last year?
How much money in fees did you collect for doing this work?
Yes. And then how many FOIAs did you process? And the idea is very simply, let's divide the amount of money by the number of FOIAs and get an average cost of FOIA. And it was in the city of Richmond, the average FOIA was something like $18. It's 17 and some change. And in Chesterfield and Henrico, it was more like 7 to 9. And that should raise eyebrows, I think.
You also tried to measure response time, right? And Jesse, where did that end up?
Well, it might not be a surprise, but Richmond City, overall, it took 16 days for Richmond City to actually get the information back to me. But I got every single FOIA back from all of the other departments of Hanover, Chesterfield, Henrico, an acknowledgement the same day. And then also I got the response on the 5th business day for the main government entities. But I've also had other experiences emailing Richmond City Council. And it's interesting because Richmond City Council, their person for this responds literally at the 5-day mark every single time. Doesn't matter what the question is, but I will get a response at the 5-day mark every single time. With them, most of the issue I've had is the cost when I'm asking for like emails is like $400. And there's a point where I'm like, you know what? My question's not worth $400.
So, Jesse, you've wrangled FOIA requests out of the city of Richmond. What's that experience been like for you? Didn't you almost file a lawsuit against them?
Yeah, absolutely. So Richmond City has a centralized FOIA process, but also somewhat decentralized. You have to go to their website and figure out who the FOIA officer is for each individual agency. But most of them, up until recently, were this person named Petula Burks, and she is the FOIA officer for the city. And she's the one that's supposed to be responding to these that you email to her. And it got to the point where I told my fiance, I was like, all right, I have emailed her. I have been promised a deadline by her. She has missed that deadline. She is still not answering my emails. And I was like, tomorrow morning, we are putting my son to bed and I am going to the courthouse to file this lawsuit.
a proper use of nap time, right?
Exactly. I was like, he's going down for his morning nap. This is lawsuit time. And it was interesting because it was going to be on a Wednesday. And then Tuesday at 4 p.m., the day before I had this plan, she ended up responding, which I thought was just so interesting. I'm like, does she like reading my mind or something like that? But that's kind of the experience with Richmond City. And it was interesting because like Richmond City, they actually had $34,000 that they got off of FOIA last year. And it was just under 3,000 requests, whereas like Chesterfield County had more requests than that. And they were literally like a tenth of the actual revenue from it. So I don't know exactly what's going on in Richmond City, but it is not a good consumer or citizen-friendly experience whatsoever.
We'll find out which local government was the big winner of the RVA Dirt FOIA experiment when we come back on RVA's Got Issues.
There is so much happening in the news every single day. Keep up with it all by subscribing to the VPM Daily Newscast. It's a roundup of Central Virginia's top stories in less than 10 minutes from the VPM News team. The VPM Daily Newscast is available on NPR One or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is RVA's Got Issues. We're back with Becca Duval and Jesse Perry of RVA Dirt, learning about which local governments do the best and worst job of responding to Freedom of Information requests. So, who is the big winner?
Drum roll.
Hanover did a spectacular job, not just a, hey, thanks, Jesse, good to hear from you, and we'll be back within the next 5 days. But 12 minutes later, it was, here you go.
Some of the departments in Hanover actually responded within 5 minutes. Like, I'm convinced that there is someone there that was like, aha, my FOIA spreadsheet is finally coming into play. I've been waiting for this day for 5 years. And they just were like so excited that they just like responded immediately.
You guys want to find that person and make friends with them, don't you?
Yeah. Like, I'm like, this person is a person after my own heart, honestly. Yeah. I also found Hanover was a little bit helpful, honestly, because they, in the email that I requested, they actually responded and were like, hey, by the way, you actually also need to FOIA all of these other city government departments because they're separate from what I'm going to give you. So I thought it was really cool that they were actually trying to help me get more information than what, instead of just saying like, hey, they've asked me specifically, and I'm not including the fact that there's about 5 or 6 other government agencies that aren't going to be included in this. So it's just interesting how different it is and how non-standard the practice can be.
Megan Ryan is a local nonprofit person here in Virginia. She directs the Virginia Coalition for Open Government. And what she says is that government too often looks at providing information as a distraction. I mean, it is kind of how you described it, Becca, earlier. It's something that distracts them from their real work. And she says you need to create a culture where it really is seen as part of their work. It sounds like the way you're describing Hanover County is that somehow they've seemed to have adopted this view that it is part of their work, whereas some of these other counties and localities maybe haven't done that. Does that sound like a way it might solve it?
See, I think that it actually needs to be at a higher level of the Virginia government. I feel like we need to improve our FOIA laws, and maybe the FOIA Council needs to be a little bit more of not just like a helpline of like, hey, I have a question about this, but maybe a little bit more of, I don't know if policing is quite the right word, but like regulatory authority.
And so this FOIA Council is a kind of advisory board that exists to investigate some of the problems that come up sometimes. Is that how it works?
They were established to try and resolve some of these issues and try and help the local government understand what the FOIA law is too, because a lot of the times these people just are not all trained in FOIA. The issue that I think a lot of FOIA offices run into is really high turnover. We can see that in the Richmond headlines over the last couple of months. There's just a lot of turnover, and it takes some learning curve. So when we're talking about reforms that we do need, the federal government has Congress gets a briefing every year about how well they're conducting their FOIAs and complying with FOIAs. And that's because it is monitored by a central office, all the agencies, and we don't have that.
I think a great example is, Becca, you had actually requested during our experiment, you got to the FOIA Council because Henrico County Public Schools and the Henrico County government doesn't keep like logs of their FOIA pricing. So it's just interesting where her question was basically, is this legal? Like, do they have to do this? And the answer is no. There is absolutely no regularity with which there is interactions between these governments. That's why we're seeing such different things. Is I feel like there's not a centralized regulatory authority that we can go to that's really monitoring this, because maybe they could find out that, hey, Hanover County has this great system where they have decentralized their FOIA process, which is something that coming out of the FOIA whistleblower lawsuit with Connie Clay in Richmond City, that they have now decided to decentralize Richmond's FOIA process, which is quote unquote in process. So maybe people are starting to see the light of this is a better way to do this, but maybe we don't have to figure this out on a locality by locality basis.
Some state action sounds like you'd be looking for with this FOIA council, maybe with standardizing the process. So what would it take to change this, to make it so that government officials here in RVA actually take this responsibility seriously?
So I do think the federal government has these extra reforms in place because the system wasn't working for them and because they had national scandals associated with them. So we've had big waves of reform after 9/11. We had big waves of reform after Watergate. And we don't have that at the state level. We don't really have big statewide scandals that are pushing us to ask, why wasn't press allowed to monitor this? Why weren't the people allowed to monitor this? And so it's up to journalists and it's up to FOIA nerds like us to come in and recognize things like things aren't really working in Richmond City. And if the people, fellow Virginians, want to help make the system better, I think we need to raise the alarm a bit. I think we need to have our eye on what are we allowed to have access to and what are we not? And what are some common sense reforms that I can ask for of my legislative body? Because they're not going to do it if we don't ask.
Jesse Perry and Becca Duval are part of RVA Dirt. You can find them at rvadirt.com. Thanks to you both.
Hey, thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
On this episode, RVA's got questions about county boards. And here to help us ask this question is our producer, Amber Coles. Hello, Amber.
Hi, Rich.
So what's our question?
All right. This week's question is from our listener, Ann Hardy. Ann's question is, what is the history and purpose of the County Board of Supervisors? A question I also have. Are they bound by duty and or law to represent their constituents?
Right, Amber, you live in a county here.
I live in Chesterfield County. I have no idea what my Board of Supervisors does.
Yeah, so you're not alone. This is like a mystery box for people. But it's actually, the basic answer is pretty simple. The County Board of Supervisors is the legislative body of the county. They're like the Congress for the county. They pass the laws. And in fact, counties are the oldest form of local government we have. They've been around since before the American Revolution. Here in Virginia, cities are separate from counties, so that's especially confusing for visitors from out of state. But each county has its own county council, this Board of Supervisors.
Okay, so we've got the history. What do?
They do all kinds of things. The main thing is that they do what other legislative bodies do, which is set the budget for the county. Right, how much money they're going to spend for the year. And that could be big money. Hanover's a small county, so it's about $8 million, which is a lot of money to you and me. Chesterfield is $2 billion. County boards also set the zoning rules, like can we build a Walmart here or where can we put new housing? They set school policies. Right now, Hanover County is getting a lot of attention about their policies about books in school libraries. You know, anything from how high your grass can get before they force you to cut it down to what kind of pig you can own.
I do have a friend who is very interested in what pig she can own.
Okay, well, if she's in Chesterfield, there's a whole section in the county code about pigs and what pigs you can own. And apparently, it's a big deal. And you can look up the county code. You just have to look online. You can just Google for Chesterfield County Code, and it has all the laws, all the things that they cover. So the bottom line here is that the Board of Supervisors are the lawmakers for your county. So if you have time, you, Amber, you, Ann, our listener, any of our listeners, you have time, go to a meeting or watch one online if you can.
I'm probably going to go ahead and look that up so I can probably watch online.
Yeah.
It's good. You have to be informed about these things.
Yeah, it's good to check it out. So I hope we answered Ann here. Amber, how do you feel? Do you know a bit more now?
I feel better. And if you, as a listener, also want to feel better, send us a question at rvasgotissues@vpm.org.
For this episode's Community Spotlight, we welcome Anna Ibrahim, Executive Director of Shalom Farms, a nonprofit that helps to build healthy communities by growing and sharing food with folks who have limited access. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you.
So we'll get to the mechanics of urban farming in just a minute, but I'm really struck by Shalom's goal to provide meaningful access to healthy food. So could you unpack that term for our listeners? What's meaningful access?
I think we use the word meaningful as a shortcut because when we talk about access, we're talking about 5 different dimensions. We're talking about affordability. So access in terms of price, is it at a price that folks can afford? We're talking about time. So is food showing up at times and in places, locations where it's easy for folks to find fresh food? We're talking about appropriateness. Is the food culturally appropriate? Is it food that folks are actually looking for? Or is it food that doesn't fit into their plans or their recipes or their lifestyles? The meaningful piece is that it's fresh food that people can get at in ways that make sense for them.
So how does that play into where you operate and who you work with?
So we work specifically within the city of Richmond. We are in the north side, we are in the east end, and we are in the south side. These are neighborhoods that we know were redlined, were historically divested from, and often neighborhoods where there are not good grocery stores or good places to find fresh food. Our mobile market program specifically is going to those neighborhoods and trying to hit places that are public access points, places where people gather naturally anyway. So that might be outside a public library, that might be outside an elementary school, that might be at a community center or at a health center like Mass Cancer Center, for example. Or it might be at a housing development where a lot of folks live and thus are going to be coming home and needing to find food close to them.
And you mentioned the history of Richmond, and we talked to a lot of folks about the sort of map of segregation, redlining, health disparities, food access. It's the same map, right? It's always the same map.
That is absolutely right. If you were to lay them on top of each other, we're all talking about the same thing.
So speaking of maps, right, you folks operate 2 urban farms, right? There's one in Midlow, right by 288, and there's one right in Richmond, right? There's one on the north side, right off Brook Road. Are people still surprised to find you tucked in there?
Yes, they are. And we actually on staff, we call it Narnia, the North Side Farm, because you can't see it from the road. And when people step in, they're like, what? What is this? And so both farms are magical, but that one has this like extra level of a production-based farm in the middle of the city is not something folks see very often. It's about 5 acres. We're farming on 1.5 acres of it right now. And I think the sort of beautiful thing about that is that it's on a bus line. So people can access it again in many different ways and be able to experience a farm without having to go far outside their neighborhood.
Let's say I do come off the bus and come into the farm. What am I seeing? Like what's going on at the farm on a typical day?
Yeah. So there's a lovely gate you get to walk through and you'll see a hoop house and a greenhouse and lots of fields.
A hoop house?
A hoop house. There's many names for this thing, but a place to grow things in a protected environment where we can control the temperature. So often what winds up in the hoop house are the things that are a little more sensitive and need a little more love, your tomatoes, your eggplant, that sort of thing. And then a greenhouse where all of our starts happen and lots of fields. So you're going to see kale, you're going to see broccoli, you're going to see lettuces. We have a blueberry patch. The Northside Farm has blueberries, and strawberries. You're going to see a packing barn where our mobile market vans are going to be coming in and out. Our Northside Farm kind of acts as our hub. What gets grown at Powhatan gets brought into Northside, and from Northside, all of our mobile market vans pack up and go out into the city to distribute the produce.
Yeah, so let's talk about the mobile market again. You mentioned that you go to places where the public are, right? You might meet them at a library. But you're also not just working on your own, right? You're partnering with other farmers.
Yeah. So this is something we've just started in the last couple of years and is really the brainchild and execution of our program director, Alistair. Alistair has really worked to develop relationships with local farmers, and we're really focusing on folks who have been marginalized in other ways, Black, Brown, queer, other small farms, women-owned farms, to bring additional products to our mobile markets.
So we have Alistair Harris here. Alistair, welcome.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit more about this mobile market? Where do you folks go?
We go into a variety of neighborhoods in the city of Richmond. And the idea with the mobile market is that you take a farmer's market and you take it into a community where people are closest. And instead of having to drive to get to the farmer's market, we bring the farmer's market to them. And so in the city of Richmond, we have 15 different locations. And they range, a few of them in the north side, a few of them in the east and East Richmond, and then some in South Richmond.
So years ago, I used to get this box of produce every week, and I would throw half of it out because I don't know what to do with 5 pounds of beets, right? So you folks work on that. You work on educating and letting people know what to do with the food. Tell us about some of the programs you do. What about Produce RX?
Produce RX is in partnership with clinical partners. So these are folks who have some sort of diet-related disease where a healthy diet would hopefully help improve health outcomes over time. So we work with clinical partners because they're going to collect the data. They're going to be the clinical coach that's working with somebody on whatever that diet-related issue is. And we make sure to provide the produce. So it's generally a weekly bag of produce that might be a 4-week cohort, a 6-week cohort, a 12-week cohort. It depends on the healthcare partner. And then if they don't have any nutrition education on staff, we'll also provide them with cooking classes. So an opportunity to say, right, what do I do with these beets? What do I do with this kale? How do I make it into something that's easy, right? It's not just about the nutrition, but like, is this simple for me to do? Folks are coming to those classes with their own recipes and their own ways to share how things should get cooked or what they do that works for them.
You also do a bit of advocacy work, right? Alistair, could you tell us a little bit about the Hunger Action Coalition?
Yes, the Hunger Action Coalition is a statewide network of organizations and mission-aligned participants that think about how do we best create policies and help move the work of reducing hunger in the state of all of us. At Shalom Farms, we are one of the participants who contribute to the network and to the coalition to think about all those areas within the state where people are experiencing hunger and in particularly experiencing food insecurity. What are some of the programs and practices and policies that can help move the needle on that? And that's what all the members and the stakeholders within the coalition are trying to do.
So our listeners can come visit and volunteer or also purchase produce?
Yes. Our mobile market schedule is on our website, and folks are welcome to come and purchase produce. We have what we call a tiered pricing system. It can be at an affordable price that works for folks, and people can use their SNAP and EBT benefits. If folks want to pay it forward and pay a supporter price to keep the work going, they're also welcome to pay that price.
Ana Ibrahim is the executive director, and Alistair Harris is the network engagement director from Shalom Farms. Thanks to you both. That's our show. Thanks to our guests, Becca Duval and Jesse Perry of RVA Dirt, and Ana Ibrahim and Alistair Harris of Shalom Farms. RVA's got issues, but we need you to tell us what those issues are. Submit a question or tell us about something exciting going on in your community at our website, rvasgotissues.vpm.org. Join us next time when RVA's Got Issues with, well, if you want to know, subscribe to us wherever you download podcasts. While you're at it, tell a friend about us, share a social media post, or even leave a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Let's get everyone in RVA listening. RVA's Got Issues is produced by Max Wasserman and Amber Coles and edited by Steve Lack. Our theme music was composed by Alexander Hitchens. Meg Lindholm is our executive producer. Steve Humble is VPM's chief content officer. I'm your host, Rich Marr. Thanks for listening.
Here at Shortwave Space Camp, we escape our everyday lives to explore the mysteries and quirks of the universe. We find weird, fun, interesting stories that explain how the cosmos is partying all around us. From stars to dwarf planets to black holes and beyond, we've got you. Listen now to the Shortwave Podcast from NPR.
VPM,